Thank you so much, Jill, and thanks to Chris Sparnick, who is our technical backup person. And of course, thanks to Dan and Mary Lou for joining me. I will provide a formal introduction to Dan and Mary Lou after I finish my remarks in about 45 minutes. But let me tell one of my one of my best anecdotes about them. I introduced them years ago, and on their first date, on their first date, they went to a meeting in the Bay Area where the leading environmental people were proposing an incinerator. And Dan and Mary Lou interrupted the meeting and provided information to discourage them from building it. And I labeled this episode as Dan and Mary and boy meets girl meets garbage incinerator. And they're in documenting they subsequently did a major report for the Office of Appropriate Technology in California on incineration. And they, with help from the Santa Rosa folks, Mike Anderson and Tanya Levy, created a domino effect in which from San Francisco all the way to San Diego, garbage incinerators that were planned were defeated. As I said, they fell very quickly. There was only one other mass kill of incinerators that I know, and that was in the early 1990s when Governor Florio canceled plans for 16 incinerators in that state. Um, so let me now go into my presentation. And the goals of the presentation are pretty straightforward. I want to provide a context into how the recycling movement of the 1970s, the anti-incineration movement of the 1980s, and the zero waste movement, which subsumed both of them, was introduced by Dan, incidentally, in the United States in the 1990s. The confluence of these movements created a legacy, and those legacies are the cities and counties in the country now that are at 50%, 60%, 70%, some touching 80%, which is a remarkable achievement. The other objectives are to identify sources of further information, individuals and organizations working in our field. Most recently, we have a resource created by Dan, Mary Lou, and Susan Kinsella, the Founder's Heart, the U.S. Recycling Archives, which describes about 50 or 60 of the case histories of people who became organizers and prominent in the zero waste movement. Another objective is to explore the links between economics or vested interest and political decision-making policies, and how these have interacted, and what is literally the political economy of wasting in the United States. On PowerPoint number 2, Chris, if you could put that one up. I wrote a couple of articles in the past year and a half on these very issues, and they are available at Resource Recovery magazine over the last 18 months, as I said. A new article, a complement to those articles that I wrote, is an article that Dan and I just completed with help from Mary Lou, which we are sending to every participant. It has not been published yet, but you will be able to get this article and read it before it comes out. All of which is to say that my conclusion is that we are in the middle of a paradigm shift, meaning new ideas, new technologies, new legislation, and that the zero waste landscape of today is just the beginning of our movement towards zero waste. People probably know that there are hundreds of zero waste organizations in the United States. These are local organizations, some are statewide, some are nationwide. The Zero Waste Movement is an international movement. The Zero Waste International Alliance has hundreds of members worldwide, And we have remarkable citizen-based organizations, the Global Gaia, the Global Anti-Incineration Alliance, ZWIA, which I just mentioned, the Race to Zero Waste, Zero Waste Europe, and there are zero waste organizations in South America, Central America, Africa, and Asia. Just to give you a sense of the dynamic growth of the idea of zero waste, Instagram recorded about 800,000 references to zero waste in the year 2000. Today, there were 3.4 million. And the next slide, PowerPoint 3, gives the current emphasis on zero waste, which is to shut down incineration, stop plastic pollution, and implement zero waste, which means reduction, reuse, recycle, and composting. The short definition of zero waste is diverting 90% of the waste stream to constructive disposal, no incineration, organics out of landfill, no toxics in packaging or products. This is the short definition of zero waste. I urge you to go to the webpage of Zero Waste International Alliance.org, ZWIA.org, for a full definition of zero waste. And my point that I will be making is that from an inspirational goal in 1995, when Dan brought back information from Australia and New Zealand, we now can put the hard numbers on zero waste and how to get there. And if we go to PowerPoint number 5, you will see the URLs for recent zero waste plans. These are plans that help communities transition from incineration to zero waste. The 4 plans are there. We urge you to look at it. And if you want to start moving your community, if you have an incinerator, I urge you to get in touch with any of us on the panel, and we can connect you to resources. These plans are important not only because of the hard numbers they put on how to get to zero waste and what it would mean if we got there, but the methodology of the report, of getting the data for the report, interviewing community groups and individuals, is a way to build the constituency. And I could give a recent example of that. In Washington, D.C., we had a compost plan for about 8 years. Nothing was happening. Then the city hired Ruth Abbey and her team to do a zero waste plan for the city. The process of setting up dozens of small meetings throughout the city, in person and through Zoom, resulted in people identifying more and more people building the constituency for composting in the city. And now the city is moving ahead very quickly. 9,000 households are already under a curbside collection pilot, and every ward has an efficient drop-off system. And we anticipate that that methodology will stimulate further and further zero waste acts beyond organics and composting. Excuse me. The next slide, PowerPoint 6, is a shortcut for how we get to zero waste. And very briefly, tax what you don't want, invest in what you want, ban what is toxic, and vote for zero waste champions. I could give a little detail here. We know what we want. We want to tax plastic. We want to tax hybrid packaging, and we certainly want to tax, if not ban, toxic packaging. We know what we want to invest in: composting, reuse, recycling. We need to ban what is dangerous. And the dangers of the waste system are quite real. From plastics to PFAS, our vital organs, our brains, our blood, newborn babies all have these chemicals embedded in our bodies at this point. And the warning from Rachel Carson has never been more important. And I'm paraphrasing her. We have proceeded far more rapidly than our knowledge justifies. And if you read the recent Food Packaging Forum report from Switzerland, There was a CNN report on September 24th. The plastic and PFAS pollution is at every stage of the chemical, every stage of our production. And we're being threatened even further, as we'll discuss in a moment, by the concept of chemical recycling, which is just processing plastic into more fossil fuel and literally intensifying the pollution from the plastic industry. The threat from the plastic industry is very apparent. The virgin plastic industry is expanding its capacity 2 to 3 times over the next few years. 25 states have passed bonding regulations that allow bonding for these facilities. And perhaps one of the most recent webinars that you may want to look at is the Waste and Climate webinar put on by the Zero Waste USA conference. And if you go to the Zero Waste USA webpage, you'll be able to see that it was part of our most recent Zero Waste conference. And the final part of how we get to zero waste is we have to vote for zero waste champions. We have to change the rules, and the only way to change the rules is to get people to represent us and represent the principles of zero waste. If we can go to PowerPoint 6, you will see how I think we can break the stagnation of our 35% recycling level. I'll be giving details on this, but the bottom line is that I think increased composting will increase our recycling rate by 10%, reuse by 5 to 10%, waste reduction will impact 10% of the waste stream, and increased recycling will get us another 25 to 30%. This will equal 90% or more. The formal name zero waste that, at least in the United States, that we put on it was zero waste or darn close to it. And we figured that 90% or more is close enough. We all understand that this data is not necessarily standardized. These are estimates. EPA every once in a while changes the definition and how they're measuring things. And of course, industry has been lightweighting packages. So those percentages are rounded off, but they give you a sense of where the growth in recycling to get us from 35% to 90% or more. Why does zero waste matter? Zero waste matters, as Dan and I mentioned in our recent article, is the canary in the environmental coal mine. If we cannot achieve zero waste, if we cannot handle our waste materials rationally, then we could never get to circularity and we could never get to a sustainable economy. At the same time, zero waste is a catalyst for more zero waste activities. Building deconstruction creates zero waste building materials for renovation and new building materials, new buildings. E-scrap repair and resale distributes powerful computerized machines at pennies on the dollar for low-income households and schools. Obviously, composting leads to local food production. So the ripple effects of zero waste are critical, and I will endeavor to show that the zero waste is needed to solve real problems: water and soil conservation, atmospheric warming, good jobs, social justice, which I will get to in a few minutes, which means the reskilling of people who don't have these skills and therefore are the underclass of the economy. Zero waste can bring people into the mainstream economy, breaking cycles of poverty, getting people out of gangs, and mending broken families and crippled communities. Let me go back to in a little bit of history of the country, bringing us up to 1960, which I will pick up in a moment. In the 1930s, of course, was the Depression. People had no money to buy goods. In the 1940s, with World War II, literally money washed over the US economy, and people had good jobs, unions were strong, and yet there were no goods to buy. So we had all this pent up demand for 20 years. Recycling was a major part of World War II the home front. It produced materials for the war effort, but it also built morale on the home front. And I always like to quote that in 1942, Popular Science magazine, Popular Science produced a manual, a how-to manual, to show people how to make their own soap, how to fix their appliances and their cars, etc. And it said that if we don't learn to reuse, we will have to do without, and to do without is not the American way. Well, I think we're in another war footing with the environment. And the reuse in this case means that we have to create an economy that uses every molecule as if it mattered. As we know, conservation of resources is essential to allow us to adapt to the frequently recurring droughts, floods, fires, tornadoes, etc., which are our new reality. So the end of the war, we all know, meant a tremendous explosion of consumption in cars, appliances, homes, etc. And it created the throwaway society. And in the next slide, you will see the basic literature of describing how we got to the throwaway economy. I won't go through them now. They're available in any library. And they could be summed up by two comments. One, by reminding people of The Death of a Salesman, the play by Arthur Miller, wrote in 1949, in which the salesman, Willy Loman, laments that he isn't even finished paying off for his appliances when they break down. And this was a key indicator of the zero waste economy, of the throwaway economy, excuse me. And PowerPoint 9 shows this literature. The other important thing to note in this era is that the magazine mogul Henry Luce in the early 1940s predicted that the United States, that the 20th century was the American century. And yet, one of the hallmarks of the American century is that we are now producing 5 pounds of garbage, of waste per day. The rest of the world is closer to 1 pound. And the documents describe the developments of that economy. Can this be reversed? Well, let's take a look at PowerPoint 7. This is a graph that I created showing the trajectory of our waste situation. In 1960, we weren't even counting our waste, but the consumerist society, the consumerist economy, exploded the amount of waste. By 1965, the National Association of Counties, National League of Cities, was screaming for some federal assistance. Landfills usually were farms outside the city that were purchased and filled up, but now the surrounding cities were suburbs, and people was voting against having new landfills. The practical effect was that open bed trucks, where garbage was collected from households, because they were open bed, you could recycle, you could pick out things for reuse. With the mass of new garbage, you had hydraulic trucks just crushing and mixing the materials, making recycling impossible. To deal with this, we created a monopoly economy in the waste sector. I believe it's the PowerPoint that describes my report on monopoly in the waste sector. I wrote that with David Morris, my colleague at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, describes the process of how monopolies were created in the waste. My informal survey of independent waste haulers and waste processors is that monopolies cause about one-third, increase the cost of solid waste management by about one-third where they would be if we had a competitive economy. I also want to mention that the economist Peter Anderson, his company is called Recycle Worlds. He was instrumental in helping David and me develop that report. In 1965, the federal government did respond to the League of Cities and the Association of Counties, and they passed the first federal solid waste legislation in about 100 years. The 1965 legislation was a research and planning bill that allowed for cities to spend money looking at the problems. Industry responded to the massive increase in waste by wanting to build incinerators. In 1969, the National Center for Waste Disposal, soon it was called the National Center for Resource Recovery, which meant incineration of garbage. It was the mass solution to the mass disposal problem that we had. I won't go into the entire history of incineration. If you go to PowerPoint 11, please, Chris, you will see our scorecard. The number of incinerators is coming down. About 300 incinerators planned in the 1970s and 1980s were defeated by a heroic effort of organized citizens, mostly financed by small business owners. And PowerPoint 12 shows where we would like to be. We think that we could get to 90% by following this hierarchy. It is an important hierarchy, mainly because EPA has an alternative hierarchy, which has incineration and landfill as allowable technologies. Incineration, they declare, is superior in waste management to landfill. Happily, this is changing, and within the next year or so, we expect EPA to change that and to follow the data and follow the science and create a new official waste hierarchy. It's very important for that to change because pro-incineration people constantly point to EPA's decision that landfilling is worse than incineration, which is simply not true. I urge, later on, I'll be showing you resources where you could follow up on that information. However, incineration was the cat's meow in the 70s and 80s. If I said in the 70s, DOE had planning grants for cities that wanted to build incinerators. DOE had a commercialization program for loans and loan guarantees. In 1979, PURPA, the Public Utility Regulatory Act, was passed, which guaranteed that if you burn garbage for electricity, the utilities will have to purchase that utility. The actual name was the Public Utility Regulatory Policies Act of 1969. Another key factor was the tightening of regulations at landfills. The Resource Conservation and Recovery Act of 1976 was critical. And at this point, most landfills were public, but there were no federal dollars for municipal landfills. And as a result of that, clever business people at Waste Management, Inc. and Browning Ferris Industries, they started developing landfills, and for which they developed their methodology, their monopoly. If we can go back to the graphic, I want to explain the 1960 to 2000 period. This was the heyday of the recycling revolution. I date it to 1969 when Cliff and Mary Humphrey did their survival walk. At the end of each day walking from San Diego to Sacramento, they started a recycling center in their encampment. These became permanent drop-off centers. And um, Cliff and Mary are remarkable people. They were true blue. They came back to Modesto, California, where they started a drop-off center and developed a ecology action program, which spread across the country. Uh, Recycle. It went throughout the country. I have a list of all the early cities from Raleigh, North Carolina, St. Paul, uh, 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 and so forth. I won't go through this list, but it was key that local Sierra clubs, duck clubs, clean water actions, all of these organizations, which were actually zero waste organizations before the concept came into the common parlance. Um, Drop-off centers became community-based collections companies. Some of them are still around. Most of them were taken over in the 80s. The pressure for cities to start recycling programs was ubiquitous. And now, as we know, just about every city in the country has a recycling program going. Um, Recycling, it was a tough battle. Recycling had its natural enemies. And if we could go to that slide 11, you will see the industries that were opposed to recycling. The virgin material companies were getting depletion allowances. The hauling companies were building their monopolies. And you'll see in a few moments when I post the Wall Street commentary on recycling, which is, I will get to that. Um, Wall Street bond firms looked at the incinerators as a tremendous payday. And in many cases, the issuing of the bonds was the purpose of the project. Because if you're an incumbent officer, an incumbent mayor or county executive, you get to distribute about 15% of the bonds, which were $500 million or more, to your local friends who will then support you in your next election. Um, as I said, the PowerPoint on incineration shows how many were defeated, and right now there are 10 active battles to shut down existing incinerators. The anti-incineration movement has moved from stopping them from being built to shutting down the incinerators. And as you all know, or many of you know, when you build an incinerator, they had a put or pay contract. You had to deliver the materials, or you would have to pay for the equivalent of those materials to the incinerator. Um, as recycling became part of the US culture and practice, the pundits the political pundits, left and right, had a field day. The left saw recycling as inconsequential, a foolish activity that just fed the maw of capitalism in a different way. They did not see the radical potential of decentralizing the nature of recycling and localism in general. The right wing, they were much more straightforward. No government has the right to tell me that I have to separate my garbage. So against these enemies and the whole consumption of society with billions of dollars on advertising, this is what was accomplished in the 70s and 80s. We got to the year 2000, annual growth in recycling was 10%, 16% until it started leveling off. It started leveling off because of, in my opinion, I welcome others' ideas, is because of single stream recycling. I will get into the details of single stream recycling in a moment, but the nadir of single stream recycling came in 2018 when the Chinese cut us off as well as other Asian nations because the materials we were sending had 20 to 40% contamination. We had a mini revolution in 2018, domestic investment in recycling capacity, plastic mills, paper mills, and electronic scrap processing plants exploded. Within 2 years, there was about $5 billion focused on our inside market, internal market. and our recycling rate went back up to 35%. It took a dip in 2018 because of the cutoff of recycling. Now, if you get, I think it's PowerPoint 14, I took a couple of excerpts from the Wall Street Journal, Moody's, and other business journals and magazines to show that the investors in Wall Street were telling Waste Management Inc. and Browning Ferris recycling is bad for business because it diverts material away from landfills, and that's where the waste belongs, in landfill. As a result, Waste Management and the other big firms were dragged kicking and screaming into recycling. And the key here is that they're making tremendous profits on landfilling and hauling, and recycling doesn't yield that much profit. And the way it worked in Washington, D.C. is a perfect example. In the 80s and early 90s, citizen pressure got the Barry administration to implement recycling. We had a dual stream system. A local businessman built a dual stream system in the north part of the city. He put in about $6 million. Soon, when the contract for processing recyclables was up again, a big waste hauling company got the contract, probably through low bidding. These companies can afford to lose money in the first few years of the contract. But because recycling was such a problem for these big firms, they had to restructure it in order to make it pay as much as it could for them. And as a result of that, the city was switched, I would say seduced, into going to single stream recycling. And what that meant was that the materials were not handled anymore in the city. The jobs were lost, the company was bought out, and the materials now in Washington, D.C. are still going about 24 miles out of town to a processing system that is inefficient. It does not recover glass, even though the city is paying a premium for glass recycling. The glass winds up in the landfill as daily cover. There's a fascinating article. Well, there are many fascinating articles if you go to Wikipedia and you look up Waste Management Inc., you will see that in around 2000, they were caught with their accounting company, Arthur Andersen, cooking the books so that their stock price would be higher than it actually was. They were fined $500 or $600 million. The key, they had to keep their stock price high because that's how they merged with all these other companies. They exchanged stock. And as a result of that, the companies were fined, but their empires were not redistributed. The other key thing is that because there were no funds for landfilling solid waste, the way there were federal funds for wastewater treatment, these monopolies were built up. So now single stream can work, but and it is working in San Francisco and San Diego. A rule of thumb is that if a single stream system is localized and is not owned or run by a large company with a landfill, then it could be successful. But dual stream recycling is much more efficient. It costs about $30 less to process dual stream than it does single stream materials. If your city is recycling 20 or 30,000 tons per year, $30 a ton is a considerable amount of money. The other part was that the big waste companies processing did not recover glass, and glass is a very important product in our industrial country. For every 100,000 tons of glass, 2,300 jobs are created in bottle manufacturing, insulation manufacturing, construction, and the abrasives industry. And all of these jobs are sacrificed when the glass is used in landfill. The companies recover the glass, but they don't pay the extra money to clean it up for industrial use. Given all these problems, it's no wonder that when recycling started, people thought it was a fantasy. You couldn't get more than 10%. You couldn't get more than 25%. And as these comments were coming out of EPA, the Institute for Local Self-Reliance was writing reports on case studies of cities that were at 25, 40%, and then over 50%. So recycling is happening. One of the key aspects of getting recycling to replace incinerators is basically the state of the art of defeating incinerators. Environmental issues raise everybody's attention, but it's the financial issues that have broken the back of incinerators. There are a couple of classic cases which I'll go through very briefly. Austin, Texas, an incinerator was under construction, and due to some great organizing by Gail Vittori and her group, the Center for the Potential of Maximum Building Materials, she showed that it was worth losing the $22 million that was for the incinerator under construction to go to recycling, composting, and landfill, and that would save the community $120 million over 20 years. And the city council reversed itself. It established a city commission, a zero waste commission, which eventually hired the right people. And now it is a leading city. It has built a resource recovery park, which I will talk about presently. There are many other examples of financial analysis leading to the defeat of a proposed incinerator. I want to tell one story of Alachua County. There was a marvelous person, Penny Wheat. She was a homemaker who went to a meeting and expressed her opposition to building an incinerator in Alachua County. This is the county where Gainesville, Florida is located. And she was told to go back to her home, go back to her kitchen, which she did. And she proved her mettle and spirit of resilience by organizing a campaign to run for the county commissioner. She won with more votes than any other county commissioner up to that point in their history. As a result, now it's a leading zero waste city. It has built a resource recovery park, which is an industrial park just for recycling, composting, and reuse companies. And right after the county banned organics from the waste stream, composting and anaerobic digestion companies are seeking to locate in that industrial park. There are many, many stories in Jersey, California, very exciting stories. I urge you to take a look at the work of the Recycling Archives, where everyone's story, or not everyone, but many of the stories of the early pioneers of zero waste and recycling are told in detail. Each story is about 40 or 50 pages, if I recall, and they're very dramatic stories. Leadership came from all over, from every aspect of life. There was an airline stewardess, a pilot, a stand-up comic, accountants, teachers, doctors, lawyers. Everyone joined in to kill incinerators and promote recycling. I mentioned resource recovery parks. There are 39 of them located in rural and urban areas of California. They're called recycling market development zones. Austin, Texas has built its own, and Alachua County has its own. And there are some private resource recovery parks, which I'll talk about momentarily. Having said all this, we do have challenges. We have tremendous challenges. The plastic industry wants to grow, and because they want to grow and produce more plastic, they need mass solutions for plastic. And as a result of that, we have the proposals all over the country now for gasification or pyrolysis plants, which, as I said earlier, actually intensify pollution from plastic. Happily, people are standing up to the lobbyists who are trying to get EPA to redefine incineration, who are trying to stop EPA from changing its waste hierarchy. There is a slide. I don't know the number of it, but there is a slide. Yes, slide 13 are the leading resources that you could find for both the environmental pollution coming from these plastic incinerators, as well as strategies to overcome them. PowerPoint 14 with Neil Tangri from Gaia, Mike Ewell from EJN, and others. Okay, the underlying principle of opposing incineration, these are the incinerator industry calls them waste to energy plants. They, in fact, are wasted energy plants. They destroy materials that could save 3 to 5 times the energy generated by incineration. So even though we've been tremendously successful in fighting incinerators, we have to keep up our defenses and even invest more to make sure that we are not hit with a new wave, a new generation of incinerators. PowerPoint 13 details the 10 cities and counties where incineration is, there are active campaigns to stop them. This year, Long Beach, Long Beach, California, shut its incinerator. Stanislaus County just closed theirs, and we expect Salem, Oregon to shut theirs by the end of the year. How do we make sure that we have enough capital to invest in where we want to go? The first step is to stop the welfare for waste, stop the depreciation allowances for companies extracting lumber and ores from the earth, and give those allowances, turn them into accretion allowances to cities and counties that are delivering clean, source-separated metal, glass, plastic to industry. Now, we have to really acknowledge the Biden administration here. Their infrastructure and inflation legislation has been critical in providing public capital, hundreds of millions of dollars to zero waste projects. And over the next few years, it's already started, there will be a tarantella, exuberant dance of all these projects coming to fruition. At the same time, we cannot rely on federal grants to make sure that we have a zero waste society. And my suggestion is that we impose a $10 national waste disposal charge. We have 300 million tons of municipal solid waste a year. At $10, we have $3 billion annually for investments all throughout the United States. These surcharges there are at least 20 states that already have them. EcoCycle in Boulder is one very famous recycling company, grassroots recycling company, that was started with the surcharge on waste disposal in Boulder County. So once we raise this money, where do we invest it? Well, obviously we invested in composting, reuse, and recycling. One of the key tools is, of course, turning our waste transfer stations into zero waste transfer stations. And I'm sure that Dan and Mary Lou will be talking about that. Yeah. Two important policies at the local level: unit pricing, charging people just for the garbage they put out, but not their recyclables or compostables. This is similar to paying for the energy used to heat your home or the gas you put in your car. You pay for what you use. Surcharge money could be used to invest in dual stream. As I said, it can save cities millions of dollars annually. Also save in processing, but also earning more money because the materials in dual stream are cleaner and get a better market. I have one example here. Uh, a city of 500,000 generally with a moderate recycling program will produce 25,000 tons annually. And if you multiply that by the savings from dual processing, you're saving over $1 million a year. And if you localize your processing in your city, you save the transportation. Another aspect that we have to invest in is reuse. Both reuse centers, I'll describe the reuse center that St. Vincent de Paul has in a moment, but I want to mention that Ulster County right now is building a reuse center. These are buildings, compartmented buildings with individual space for small reuse companies. The country has wonderful models, Urban Ore, of course, in Berkeley, Community Forklift in DC, Construction Junction in Pennsylvania, uh, many others. Of course, there are at least 50 Habitat for Humanity restores. And of course, I want to mention one of my favorite Finger Lakes reuse in Ithaca, New York, which is expanding to other cities. These companies employ from 30 to 40 workers. They manage about 10,000 tons per year, and they pay sales taxes. Dan and Mary Lou are going to describe. Um, Let me just, I have to go into some details because I want to make the case that zero waste is a social justice as well as an environmental justice tool. And I'll tell the story of Second Chance in Baltimore. It's a deconstruction nonprofit. It started in 2013 with 6 workers, which the Institute for Local Self-Reliance trained. We had a great trainer in Jim Primdahl. That company now has 250 workers in their deconstruction and resale of building materials. The company has contracts with the city. The most important one is that when it needs a new worker, it goes to the welfare rolls, now called TANF rolls, and it hires the person, trains the person. If the person completes the I think it's 10 or 15-week training program, they have a permanent job, good wages, good benefits. And as I said, 90% of the 250 workers were drawn from the hard to employ people in the city. So as Mark Foster of Second Chance likes to say, we're not only recycling building materials, we're recycling people. And if you go, please, to PowerPoint 16, you'll see a picture of workers. I can't tell you what a pleasure it is to work with these crews, from the early morning calisthenics to loosen up so we don't get hurt on the job. These workers they've gained independence. Each of these workers could start their own businesses if they wanted to, and their lives have been turned around. And deconstruction literally rippled up from the grassroots to the federal programs. It's deconstruction started, or where I learned it was in California, where groups were taking down military barracks, recovering redwood and Douglas fir, wood that was not available elsewhere. And from that, it spread through committees of correspondence, just like in our early revolutionary days. It influenced HHS, the federal agency. It influenced HUD. The HUD story, Housing and Urban Development, is fascinating. Thanks to an incredible community organizer, Charlie Tisdale in Bridgeport, Connecticut. He got us the attention of House of Representative Shays, who got us meetings with Cuomo. Cuomo challenged us to do a test in Hartford, Connecticut. We trained 10 workers, incredible help from the Laborers International Union. The union workers took down the old public housing, and they were able to purchase the new houses that were built in its place. The deconstruction now, there's a trade agent organization of probably 30 or 40 businesses, probably more now. The Building Materials Reuse Association. There's not only Second Chance, but there's Second Chance is located in Baltimore, but they send crews all up and down the East Coast. Dave Bennett Resource Innovation Center, he has started about 20 companies And the reuse people from California have working relationships in 16 different cities, um, all working on building deconstruction and not only recovering materials, but recovering lives. Um, there's a new wave of reuse. I want to mention the Reuse Solutions Network, which is a remarkable network set up by Upstream. And it is focused on getting theater chains, sports stadium, restaurants, schools, government cafeterias, all to start using permanent cups, either stainless steel or durable plastic. One such company, We Reuse in Detroit, is actually planning to manufacture those products in the city of Detroit. Another aspect is street swaps and repair cafes. There's a fascinating book called The Repair Revolution by John Wackman and Elizabeth Wright, which goes into details of how to set these up. And Laura Anthony down in San Diego with Zero Waste San Diego operates two repair cafes a month, and she's diverting about 4 tons of waste per year. Um, Other industries that other companies that deserve mention, Homeboy Industries is focused on getting young people out of gangs through repair of electronic material. Recycle Force in Indianapolis actually sends people to jails as people are being released to recruit them for training and jobs in their programs. I mentioned let me just mention the reuse corridor, which is carrying out this reuse phenomenon all throughout central Appalachia, Ohio, Kentucky, and West Virginia. They've introduced the notion of reskilling the workforce through waste. The St. Vincent de Paul in Lane County, Oregon, have pioneered in this. They have a reuse center, a series of workshops that repair appliances, mattresses, electronic, textiles, and more. They're based in Eugene, Oregon, but they send their materials as far south as San Francisco, as far north as Portland, Oregon. They bring finished products to sell, repaired products to sell, and they come back with products to repair and then resell. St. Vincent de Paul has about 800 workers in trucking, repair, selling, and they have created the Cascade Alliance, which has helped establish these companies throughout the country. The point here is that reuse is a social justice as much as an economic and environmental activity. When we come to composting, I want to try to summarize, but we're in the middle of a composting revolution. Marvin Barnes in Baltimore calls it compost fever. It's popping up everywhere. Small companies are growing into citywide enterprises. Garbage for Gardens just got a contract to collect organics from 24,000 households in the city of Boston. In Cleveland, Rust Belt Riders grew from a community drop-off. Now they have 5 trucks and about 35 workers. The Cleveland model was used in Detroit, where we put together with local composting groups a plan to collect waste organic citywide and develop a program that is comparable to the mayor's 100 acres of urban agriculture, which was just announced last month. Many of these compost projects need anchors. For instance, in Albany, New York, Food Scraps 360 uses the Bethlehem City, an adjacent city, their composting facility, and in the reuse corridor that I mentioned in Central Appalachia, Marshall University is the compost anchor. I don't think I have to go into why compost is critical. It's 1/3 of the waste stream, and it is very good for the environment. Let me just refer, Zero Waste USA has a Cool Now webinar series on composting, and a few months ago, we had Craig Coker of Coker Compost and Nora Goldstein of compost of Biocycle that gave a terrific tour de force webinar. And I suggest people go to the Zero Waste USA Cool Now webpage to take a look at it. There's tremendous access opportunity for growth. Only 15 million households are currently composting, and yet composting accounts for about 24% of the 100 million tons a year that is recycled in the US economy. As Nora Goldstein pointed out in her presentation that I just mentioned, composting is now being baked in with economic incentives, zoning ordinances, etc. And backyard composting. There's a project I came across in Los Angeles. Nick Higgins and his wife run a garden to table restaurant. They compost in the backyard, and Nick put together a 90-second video, which in 3 months on YouTube has 10 million views. And there's no better way for intergenerational environmental learning than setting up a compost pile in your backyard. Most recently, farms are becoming anchors for composting, recreating what occurred in New York City and Philadelphia and other cities in the 1890s and early 20th century, where cities would send organic material in a nutrient exchange, so-called, to surrounding farms and bringing in food and wood for fuel from the surrounding farms. The new rules that are coming in for composting are staggering. They're much more comprehensive than the changes that occurred in the 70s and 80s for recycling. There are now food rescue laws. There are surcharges, sales tax and purchasing tax exemptions, procurement programs for highways. In Camp Small, the city invested in a facility that's doing composting of street debris after storms. They are now processing wood trees into lumber for that industry in the Baltimore area. There are compost gardens from LA to New York City. And the interesting thing is what happens when a composting anchor disappears. This happened in 2014 when a private compost facility in Wilmington, Delaware, which was serving New York, Philadelphia, DC, had to shut down. It tried to expand too quickly. And as soon as it stopped taking materials, Howard County, Maryland, pressured their government to create a composting system for that county. Prince George's County did the same thing, only they built a much bigger system, which is now accommodating materials coming in from all over the region, including Washington, D.C. Westchester is building its second composting facility. Warren County and Dutchess County in New York are doing the same. Ulster County had to expand its facility 3 times as more and more people started recycling. One other aspect of recycling, and this was brought to my attention by John Holes, my colleague and friend from Environmental Management Systems. He's working for the Archdiocese of Atlanta, and they have a vibrant composting and food production program as part of their service to low-income people to produce food locally and end hunger in that community. I want to point out that in Baltimore, when we were doing our zero waste plan, we found that the Catholic Church was an ally. Zero waste was consistent with their teachings, and they offered vacant buildings to house used furniture as a furniture bank for families that were displaced in emergencies. I did post on PowerPoint 18 sources of information on composting, the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, BioCycle Magazine, U.S. Composting Council, and Hidden Resources out in California, and one other. Composting is critical not only because it's so much of the waste stream, about 1/3, but it decentralizes solid waste management. It takes materials away from the big companies and helps promote local decision making. Oh, just a word about anaerobic digestion. It's comparable to it's complementary to composting, where you recover methane. On the other hand, scaling is difficult. You can have an economically an efficient system at 5,000 tons per year, but you could also build one for 120,000 tons per year. And if you build them that large, you literally, those companies will eat up the materials and make it much harder for small scale composting activity to take place. I want to mention a couple of important developments in composting. The Marin County, California composting project, it's on the internet. You could get it. It showed that if you use compost on rangeland, you can actually stem global warming. I must have a shout out to Jerry Goldstein and his colleague, Dr. Clarence Golick, who produced a steady growth of basically the science of composting in the 1960s and 1970s. And of course, I must mention the late Mary Applehoff, who wrote Worms Eat My Garbage, pioneer vermicomposting person. As her second book, Worms Eat More of My Garbage, was followed up by a video called Wormmania, where she got into a worm costume and showed how worms eat the bacteria from the decomposing materials. I'm coming to the end of my presentation, and I just want to mention that source reduction, we're expecting a tremendous amount of source reduction from EPR. There are skeptics, and I'm quoting here from Elizabeth Balkin, Director of ReLoop of North America, and she says that EPR could be used as a tool for accelerating or decelerating source reduction. Producers, she feels, might be focused on securing the cheapest possible programs, whereas source reduction is a long-term investment. And the antidote is to make sure that EPR, when it is introduced, is infused with citizens who are pushing for zero waste policies, programs, and enterprises. I think I will end here. I want to mention that Massachusetts and Colorado have great programs in which the state and local governments meet, plan, and implement zero waste activities. And finally, the sources of capital, which I already mentioned. There are the surcharges, which I think are critical, and those surcharges will be a permanent fund for people to follow these systems, for implementing zero waste systems. To summarize, the federal government now is providing the public capital, but we need a permanent source of public capital, which I propose would be a $10 surcharge on all waste disposed of in landfills or incinerators in the country. My final word is that zero waste is both the means and the end to local self-reliance and local decision-making, and that the pull of zero waste is from the environmental justice side, the global warming side, social justice, reskilling, employment, small business, and local control. And finally, zero waste actually reduces the cost of solid waste management. And as I said, zero waste is a vision, and yet now we are putting the hard numbers on it and making it quite real. And with that, I will stop. I went over 8 minutes. I apologize. And Dan and Mary Lou, let me introduce them. Dan and Mary Lou are known because of Urban Ore, which literally grew out of the dump, which was then the bay in the San Francisco Bay where the Berkeley dump was. And they've managed for decades and built up an incredibly strong business, a business that supplies other businesses with their inventory. But Dan and Mary Lou have done more than that. They have been thought leaders. Dan has taught us that the more you keep it separate, the more value you can create in your reused items. And Mary Lou has taught us that literally that waste is not waste until you waste it. The material that is called waste is in our hands every day at work, play, and recreation, and at the home. And if you decide to keep it separate, you're contributing to zero waste. If you put it in and you declare it waste, you're making a bad decision. And with that, one final area that they were instrumental in is telling us the difference between destructive disposal, incineration and landfill, and creative disposal, reuse, recycling, and composting. And with that, I will be quiet. And thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you. Dan, are you going first or?
Well, you wanted to go first, so I will step aside and listen as you speak.
Okay, thank you very much. Chris, if you could bring up the PDFs for the entropy and the 3 R's, that would be great.
Which would you like to start with?
The 3 R's, entropy and the 3 R's. Yeah, that's the one. And while we're getting started here, I wanted to do 2 little short things. One is waste isn't waste until it's wasted is actually a quote from Dr. Orr here from Dan. And I don't remember. Oh, yes. The second thing is you will see over my shoulder an image of the Earth. This is from 1999. It's a NASA image. NASA, of course, measures the gases in the Earth's atmosphere. And in 1999, they decided they would they would turn green all the methane from the measurements in the atmosphere. And this is what the methane gas profile looked like. They used to have on their site a little video where they would set the Earth rotating and you could watch the methane lap the shores of Australia, just like waves. And it turns out that methane spins to the poles. And we know that the poles are melting faster than most people's formula is accounted for, and this may be the reason why, because methane is up to 100 times more effective for global warming than CO2, and the largest human-created source of methane is landfills. So here's a pretty good reason why landfills are terrible. And I did want to anti-entropy is my screen name, my pseudonym, my nom de plume, and people may have heard of anti-entropy. And here's the reason why I think it's so important. It's the second law of thermodynamics, entropy. Next slide, I guess. Yes. The law of entropy, which is the second law of thermodynamics, which Einstein said would never be overturned. It says natural processes are irreversible. Time flies like an arrow. And Bob Dylan says lost time is not found again. So Humpty Dumpty can't be put back together. The law of entropy applies to material resources. We bring them from the earth. We spend a lot of energy getting resources from the earth. Then we spend a lot of energy making things and then transporting them, and then we use them, and then we spend a lot of energy getting rid of them, which we know as disposal. So that's a lot of energy. Next slide. and the use of energy cannot be reversed. Entropy, you can think of entropy as disorder or chaos. And every time you change the state of a material, you're going to increase the disorder of the energy embodied in that object. So if you look at your dining room table, if it's wood, for example, it's been cut down from a forest and it's no longer in the forest, creating oxygen and absorbing carbon dioxide, is being made into a table. So you cut it down, you manufacture it into a table, you use the table, and then when you get rid of the table, you want a new table, or that table, something happens to it. You need to get rid of that table, and what are you going to do with it? The more energy you conserve, the less you have to replace that object. So next image. So the ideal is you want to minimize the number of times you have to change the state of a material, because the more you increase the entropy, the more energy you release and can't recover in a useful form. Next slide, which is, energy incineration, materials incineration does the most to maximize entropy. And here's an image of the first Packer truck from the 1930s. And I was born in Detroit in Henry Ford Hospital with a steering wheel in my hand when it was Motor City. Well, the Packer truck also came to us from Motor City. This is the first Packer truck. And there is no better way to manufacture entropy than to create garbage. It's mix and mash for the materials. You pick all the materials up in one container and you mash them together with a nice compactor device, and then you unload them and you have maximized the entropy. Well, that's the opposite way from what we should be going for: sustainable planet. Next slide. Okay, so it's one way in the conservation hierarchy because you cannot reverse that energy flow. Therefore, if you want to conserve your energy and conserve the materials, you have a conservation hierarchy that has developed: reduce, reuse, recycle. That's a hierarchy, not just because we like it, but it complies with the laws of physics to reduce the energy wasted. Next slide. And so you want to reduce the entropy. So God recycles and the devil burns. Okay, thank you very much. That's that slideshow. And then, Chris, if we could go to the next slideshow, which I think Dan wanted to be the one on, Dan, you wanted finances, right? So that's the slideshow on, what's it called? The salvage service fee.
Yeah, that's part of what it's about. Yes. So
Yes.
this little show was put together by Max Wexler. He is currently in a new business that is selling reused lumber. So he's in the reuse business. He grew up in a salvage yard. His father was a recycler before the word recycling was in dictionaries. They back then they called it scrap, and so he was a scrapper. And he just recently died about 2 years ago. But anyway, Max is a brilliant guy with a with a
MBA.
MBA and a degree in environmental science. And he worked for Urban Ore for a long time, and he's learned a lot about how we operate and how the transfer station operates, because he got out there. He's a physically strong guy, and he got out there and did what I did when we started Urban Ore. You have to haul the stuff out using your own muscle power. That's all you've got. So here we go. Let's go. We'll just move through these quickly. We're on the left here, we're looking down at the top of Urbanor's main building. We have 4 buildings. The parking lot you can see in the foreground. But the other thing about this one is that you can see that we have a nice new roof. And also we have this big bunch of solar collectors. Well, that is just an incredibly important thing to understand. Here's what happened. We put $250,000 into putting those solar collectors on the roof. We were actually able to pay cash for the whole thing. So we had no financing. The day it went, or the month it went live, our our electric bill from PG&E went from $2,400 a month to $28 a month. That has an enormous reduction. So figuring on how long it takes to pay off the money, the capital investment, it'll probably pay itself off within about 5 years, but it sure is nice to get those bills monthly for $28. And not only that, but we also, with that, just that number of solar collectors, we produce more power than we use, and we get a check every so often for the excess power that we produce. Next. This is a photo of just the early stages of Urbanor after we left the landfill. We started at the landfill and then we moved to a developed site. And the significance here is that every square foot of the land that you see here was supposed to be occupied by an incinerator. We defeated the incinerator with the help of Ecology Center and Community Conservation Center. And as a result, we got to occupy this space. We didn't have that in mind when we did it. It was a surprise when it was offered to us. We worked out a deal with the city of Berkeley where we paid them rent. And I'm a big fan of recycling, paying rent on any developed facility. I think it's the way to go. I think when you take money and that you take something that's really costs money and you get it for free, there's going to be a price somewhere. And the price is that I think you lose some autonomy and you lose some ability to speak truth to power. Next. So here's our annual disposal numbers. Counting disposal here has the number of tons we took off the transfer station floor in 2018, I think it was. That was about 800 tons. That's about what it averages. It's up more like 850 to 900 right now. Next. And that's
Wait, Dan, can we go back just one slide back to that slide? This is 2017, and this is all the disposal, including what we've recycled, which we would call scrap, including glass and ceramics. So we do recycle ceramics that's made into roadbed, crushed and made into roadbed. But notice that for the transfer station, we salvaged 729 tons. And so that's stuff that people paid to make go away. People paid to make that into landfill. We brought it back instead, and we salvaged 729 tons, and we only took back 80 tons. So that's about 10%, just a little over 10% from what we salvaged. And people brought into us up to 100 vehicles a day of other stuff. And still, we only took back 80 tons. So
currently, what we take to landfill is less than 1% of everything we handle. And we think we handle about 8,000 tons per year. So we are at that phrase that Neil used a while ago, zero waste or darn close. We're there. So back to the slides here. We got our first salvaging contract with the city of Berkeley sometime in the 1980s. I don't remember anymore. We had an earlier one with a contractor out at the dump. then we had a salvage service fee that started getting paid, but then the city ran into some financial difficulties and they yanked it away. But then after a while, things restored. This was after the Great Recession. And after the Great Recession turned back into growth, the city was able to renew the salvage service fee. So now we get $47.74 per ton for every ton that our salvagers take off the transfer station floor. That generates about 35,000 a year, which is really not a very large amount compared to how much we actually make. We really actually turn over about 3.4 million. And so this is just a small percentage of that, but it's a really important thing symbolically, because the 47.74 per ton is exactly the amount of money that the city would pay if they delivered that same ton to the waste management landfill that's located in the headwaters of Five Creeks above Berkeley. Next. So we had a lot of lobbying going on, and we had good people. This just is about who contributed to this development. Sophie Hahn from City Council, the mayor, also Jesse Arreguín, Phil Harrington, Department of Public Works. He okayed the whole thing after we presented to him, and the Zero Waste Division manager, Greg Apa, wrote the contract amendment. So this thing had the full support of the city's Zero Waste Division, and it went through on the consent calendar. Next. This is just from 2018. It's gone way up since then. This is just the amount of taxes that we pay. And all of this money is earned from selling reusable goods and scrap. Reusable goods is by far the biggest contributor to our income, by far. Scrap is very small, but still significant. And then there's that salvage service fee. Those are our main sources of income. But the first number there, 56,000, that's also probably gone up. That's what we pay out to take things in when people bring things that are quite valuable. We, at our option, our staff can pay out money through either trade credits or cash. There's also a figure there for sales tax collected over a period of a year, $226,000 in 2018. Just this last month, we're about to pay that $28,000 in sales taxes that we collect for the state, and that gets distributed to all kinds of governments. So, you start thinking about that and thinking about reuse and the potential for reuse to support governments, and it becomes a big, big, big number. Next.
No, wait, can I add something?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay, for economic benefits, Max did not list in here payroll. Now we also provide 40 jobs, which means some of those are part-time people. We hire people for full-time. Some people like to drop back to part-time because we're in an area where people can, this is their day job and they can make part of their living from being in a band or doing their photography or their artwork or whatever. So some people will drop back to part-time, but we do provide full-time. We do provide, a lot of jobs. Most people are full-time, and our payroll alone is about half of income. So when we say we bring in $3.5 million a year. I hear a lot in these financial discussions. I hear a lot about cost, and this is one of Dan's favorite horses to ride. We hear about the expense. We don't hear about income, and we would like to emphasize that Urbanor generates $3.5 million of income every year. So that money goes out. You know, we may, if we're good and if we manage correctly, we may keep like 5 to 7% of that as profit, which we always reinvest in the operation. But the other 90+% goes out to the community for one thing and another. It goes out purchases for resale. A lot goes out, you'll notice, in sales tax. That's a lot of money that goes back to the state. Some goes back to the locality that we pay property tax, payroll taxes, but we also pay payroll, which means that people have jobs. So we create a lot of work for people, and it's good work. And it's physical and intellectual at the same time, and people have a good time working. So you can add like more than $1.5 million to that figure there and get more of a picture of our economic benefits. And then there are secondary and tertiary benefits as well, because secondary benefits, we also provide income to the small contractors who buy from us, and they're helping somebody remodel their kitchen or their bathroom or add on a room or whatever. And they buy a used door from us. Well, that door is going to need at least repainting. Maybe it'll need sanding. Maybe there's a crack in it. They need to patch the crack and rehang the door. Well, that contractor has made money from our materials. So there's secondary economic impact. And then there's also the fact that low income people buy used materials when they can't afford new. Many of our used materials are actually higher quality because they come from old growth forests and not tree farms. So it's better wood. And some of the furniture, you say that same thing. So we have tertiary benefits in that we keep the real estate value and the property values up, and we keep people in their homes, and we keep the property taxes up. So we have not only our direct economic benefits, but we also have secondary and tertiary economic benefits that we don't know how to quantify, but we know they're there. Thank you
Right.
very much, Dan.
So, yeah, okay, so let's move on to the next one. Well, some of this was just now covered by Mary Lou. Let's see what we're talking about here. Preservation of cultural and material value is a real important one. Um, there, some of the most important things that we've found have incredible value from a cultural perspective, because people throw things out and they don't even know what they're throwing out. People die. Uh, they maybe have a house full of stuff. A bunch of people from the family come in. They only have a week to get rid of everything. They put it all in boxes. They forget what's in the boxes. We get the boxes. We find jewelry. But we also find incredibly important historical documents and that sort of thing. And some of it we sell and some of it we give away. So that's an interesting one. There's a lot of other things in that list, but I'll move on to the next one. So here's how the salvaging contract works. We submit every month an invoice to the city. And so this is how we know how much to charge the city at $47.74 per ton. And it comes from our trucks going over a scale. So we know exactly how much we're sending to landfill and exactly how much we're saving from the landfill. And so it's not an ambiguous number. So then we also submit to the city quarterly reports, and they report that to the state because the state has goals and so does the city. So this adds to the city's profile with respect to how are we doing moving toward zero waste. And then part of our contract too is that we need to show that we're a safe business, and we have just, for example, completed on time a very large exercise about workplace violence, and now we're doing other add-ons to that. our safety is just incredibly good. I remember early on, we were told many times, and I was told when I first started in Oregon, that it was much too dangerous to do salvaging. That's not true. That is so not true, and we have proven it, and we can show with exact numbers why that isn't true. We have the insurance industry has a number that sums up the business's experience with claims, and the best you can do is 0.70. 0.70 is 0.30 less than 1.0. 1.0 is average. Urban Ore is linked in with things like lumber yards. Ours is almost always 0.70 to about 0.75. That's as good as you get. Our insurance broker is just amazed at how safe we are. But the overall perception is, oh gosh, no, you can't do salvaging. It's too expensive. Next. It's not true. Next.
Salvaging is too dangerous. Yes.
It can be.
Not so.
It can be.
Not so. If
So
you don't know how to do it.
We spend a lot of time making sure that we talk safety all the time. Every time we have a department meeting, every time we have a manager's meeting, the very first thing on every agenda is safety. And you bring up safety, and people say, oh yeah, now I remember over there, there's a bunch of wires that are laying around. Well, how are we going to fix that? Okay, take care of that. Or a window got broken, or there's a bunch of glass, or whatever. So it's a chance for everybody to contribute to the safety discussion, and it's structured right into our meeting, the way we handle meetings, and it's the number one agenda item on
because safety is first.
Yeah.
And the important thing there is when you say safety first, well, yeah. No, you put safety first in every meeting, and you actually discuss it first, and you talk about when you get together, you talk about safety first. And what you're doing is you build in a culture of safety. Very, very important. And that's also, Dan founded Urban Ore. And Dan is a sociologist, and he perceived the challenge as capital versus labor. And he constructed a company built on labor, which is humans. So when you have a bunch of humans, you need to take care of your humans, and you create a culture of safety so that they understand that the company cares about whether they're safe. B, the company treats safety as though it's really something important, and you end up protecting your humans. And it's like conserving your capital. You're protecting you're protecting your people, and they respond knowing that the company cares about them because they are part of the company. We're all really in one boat, and the company takes a great care to make people feel like they're cared for.
So Mary Lou,
Very
could you
important.
talk about the compensation system and explain it?
Oh, sure. The compensation system is an unusual compensation system. Everybody in the company, top to bottom, is paid, except for Dan and me. And the reason we're not in this anymore, we used to be, but we work mostly at home now. We're older, and there are some mobility problems. So we're not down at the facility anymore generating income. So we've dropped out of the system, and you'll understand why in just a minute. When we were down there working the way we were for 40 years, now it's 43 years that the company's been in business. So it's only been a couple of years that we haven't participated in this system, but The idea is every person in the corporation, it's a corporation for profit, and every person in the corporation, top to bottom, is an hourly worker. Dan and I didn't get overtime, everybody else gets overtime. But everybody is an hourly worker, and there are components to the hourly wage. First, there's a base wage, an individual wage. And that individual wage, in our case, starts at $13.60 an hour, which is below minimum wage in California, but it's only one component. So your personal wage, your base wage, starts out, so for an introductory worker, first day on the job, you make $13.60 per hour as your base wage. Then over time, you can increase that base wage by developing either expertise in merchandise, materials, or by accepting responsibility, supervisory responsibility, or some task responsibility that's a specialty, like taking care of the cats. We have feral cats who are part of the rodent control. So if you're the cat care specialist, that earns you extra money. If you are a specialist in clothing, that earns you extra money. If you're a specialist in electronics, that earns you extra money, which adds to the base wage. And then the company kicks into a pool. There's a sharing pool. And the company kicks in $15 a ton. Of the $47.74 that we get, the company puts $15 into the pool, and everybody shares in that.
No, 15, wait a minute.
Yeah, 15.
15% of sales for that.
No. Well, the salvaging incentive is $15. Yeah, the salvaging incentive is $15 a ton that we salvage from the transfer station or that our outside trader brings in. We have two guys in a truck who go out and do pickups. And we figure that they do, I think we figure a half a ton per pickup. So $15 a ton that we bring in goes into the pool. The biggest part of the sharing pool, however, is from income. And we pay twice a month, and every month, every pay period, we take the gross income. All we subtract out is sales tax, because that's not actually ours. We're just the unpaid tax collector for the state. So we take in our own gross income, figure 15% of that, and that 15% goes into the sharing pool. So the sharing pool is $15 a ton that we have salvaged, and 15% of our gross income. And then we split that equally among all staff according to the number of hours worked. So we that combination of the pool split is a very large contributor to people's wages. So if you're making $13.60 an hour, then you also get over time whatever expertise, or responsibility bump. But the sharing, I think this last year it was a little higher. This year I think it's more than $7 an hour. So it fluctuates. The income per person fluctuates with income generated, but it's a substantial amount. So if you're making $13.60 and you don't have any expertise in anything, and all you get is your base wage plus the sharing, you're still making just under $22 an hour first day on the job. And then you can increase that over time. And your increase in income and your increase in wages are always tied to your own developing expertise, or your developing responsibilities, or the increase in income for the whole company that you have helped generate. It's very important for this company to tie wages to income, because the stuff that comes in from either the dump, the transfer station, or that people bring us, it doesn't come in shrink wrapped on pallets with barcodes. it's so easy to steal. The compensation system not only rewards people for their it rewards people for their own performance, it rewards people's teamwork, and it rewards honesty and efficiency in, putting the materials through from beginning to end. It comes in the back door, it gets wiped off and priced and by somebody who understands what they're pricing and how come this cup is worth 50 cents and that one is worth $1. It's always a good deal at Urban One. And so, but the task is throughput. So you accumulate, stuff comes in, you sort it, you clean it off, you price it, and you take it out to the sales floor and display it as merchandise, and that's trash to treasure, garbage to gold, waste to wealth. Right in the processing area and the pricing area, that's where the magic happens, and we sprinkle fairy dust on everything, and we transform it into income for ourselves, and the income for the staff is directly tied to the income that they generate, because we delegate responsibility down as far as we possibly can. And everybody who's at the receiving door and everybody at the cash register has the capability to negotiate on behalf of the company. They negotiate prices of stuff, what we'll pay coming in, what we'll accept coming in. We negotiate prices on the way out. Everybody is responsible for increasing the amount of materials coming in and increasing the amount of materials going out, setting prices that are fair both to the company and to the customer, and prices that respect the materials. Because we got in a butcher table from France. It was like 100-year-old butcher table, and it went out for $1,500. If we let that go out for $50, the customer would have been thrilled, but they were still getting a good deal at $1,500, believe it or not. And it sat around for a while and made us look nice while it was sitting around. And then we sold it to somebody who understood what it was really worth. So we made a lot of money on the table. The people who worked on that merchandise, who received it and who priced it correctly and who sold it, they got money from their work. Their own work generated their own income. And we think that tie is really crucial and has allowed us to grow. We think that detaching wages from income is a big mistake. And we encourage everybody to attach people's personal income to their personal productivity, and you will see productivity skyrocket. And then you can expand.
So are you going to do a profit sharing then?
Oh, profit sharing, yes. Well, twice a year, assuming that we have a profit, income minus expense equals operating profit. If we have an operating profit, then we share 10% of that. We split it up among all staff, and we have a different sharing formula that rewards longevity and rank, but everybody gets some. If we have a profit, everybody gets some. The thing is that day-to-day income depends on everybody's work, and profit depends on managerial control of expenses. So people would like a good profit sharing, and it's for the managers to control expenses. And if they do a good job of that, then everybody gets to share the profit as well.
Well, and the profit can be very large or very small. It can be nothing. And
it can be at a loss.
And it can also be extremely, extremely large. Here's a funny one. When COVID hit, we had to close because the whole state was in lockdown. And we used the first couple or 3 days to research the state guidance, state, local, and federal guidance on whether you could stay open or not. We felt like we had to somehow or other figure out a way to open. we found out that we were an essential business and we reopened after 3 days. What does it mean to be an essential business? Well, we were selling hardware. That's one of the characteristics of an essential business. Another is we were selling building materials. Another was that we were taking care of things that otherwise would be trash and dumped in the streets and therefore would become a health hazard. So we're in the disposal business. So on the basis of that, we reopened and nobody ever came and said, oh, you can't do that. But what happened was we lost half of our staff and at least half of our customers in that 3 day period. The rest of the staff stayed home and most of them didn't return. They moved into this new economy that was created by taking unemployment. And then as labor shortages started up, they took other jobs and they just never came back. But the ones that did come back are some of our very best managers and longest term employees. So that year was, that very first year was obviously a loss in the first couple or 3 months. But then after that, it became extremely profitable. Why was that? Well, people were all of a sudden adjusting to being home all the time. So they were fixing up their homes. The other thing they were doing was cleaning out their homes because now they had their children with them at home because the schools were closing a lot of times. So you just had all these things going together to increase supply and increase demand at the same time. Fast forward to the second year of COVID, we had a massive profit. And so I remember getting my profit share check for that, and it was bigger than my paycheck. And a bunch of our staff had the same experience. Since then, we've had times when there was no profit. And that relates to another problem that we have, which is that we've had a lot of extreme legal expenses connected to a very adversarial union. So I'm not going to go into that at all. There's way too much. I could talk about it all day long. It's
let's not.
but I don't want to spend time talking about it. It's just that it has had a pernicious effect on profit. I think that it's kind of over now. I think we're on our way to being profitable again, and we'll have to see. That's all I can say. But when we do have a profit, it will add for that incoming person who makes $22 per hour on average this year. It will add to that some unknown amount.
It's important to emphasize cooperative work and teamwork, that everyone in the company, top to bottom, needs to cooperate with each other.
So there we are. Thank you very much. I think.
Oh, can I add one more thing? One more thing. I just actually put this into the chat. For financing and financial health of the community and any individual enterprise, it's really important, I think, to break the grip of the garbage industry's monopoly on the resources. If we think of it as resources, which it is, it's a whole resource flow, and we are in the resource development industry. We are not in the resource wasting industry. And if you want to build your resource development industries, you have to break the grip of the monopoly that garbage has on the flow of the resources. Now, the garbage monopolies underwrite city budgets because they provide franchise fees. The city pays the garbage company, but then there's money that comes back in the form of franchise fees, millions of dollars, often millions of dollars, and the cities rely on that income. So cities have a conflict of interest. They say they want zero waste, and they do. They want zero waste, but they have a garbage monopoly, and the garbage monopoly underwrites their budget. So they're in a bind. And we need to emphasize the potential, we need to emphasize the economic advantage to the city of the resource development industries like us. We don't want the money personally, but we think the cities need to understand how much more they could be bringing in to the city by developing those resources instead of wasting them.
I have a name for what we're doing that I think is real important for you to understand. I think a lot of small businesses would do really well to look at very carefully at our compensation system and see if they could work it out for their own enterprise, because what it does is it reduces the amount of administrative time you have to put in to get people to work. You're not just standing there saying, I'm going to crack the whip on you, by golly. No, the whip is inside your head. And it's not even a whip. It's actually just an incentive. It's an attraction. It's a good thing, not a bad thing. So my overall view of it is that we have pioneered in a way, and I think we're not the only ones. I think there's probably thousands of people tinkering in the same way we have with compensation, but I call it capitalism without greed. Capitalism is too important to throw out. Capital is money that you've earned that is over and above what it takes to cost to run the business. It can be spent, it can be put into a capital fund, it can be spent on assets, which is what we did when we had massive profits. That's how we paid cash for the solar collectors. That's how we paid cash for a brand new Nissan forklift that was $90,000. We paid cash for a big new overhead door. The old one was so awful that it was almost impossible for some of our employees to raise and lower. And we got a brand new one. It was $60,000, $80,000 by the time we were done with it.
Yeah, we decided not to invest in the super yacht. We got to roll
So Mary Lou and I live in a modest home, and we're happy with the way we are. We're not.
How much do you need?
Wealth. So on the other hand, we are, we do own a substantial piece of real estate because we were able, of all things, to buy most of the property that we sit on. And now our mortgage is down to about 2.6 million, and it's worth a whole lot more than that. So
yeah, it's worth about 10 million.
Wow.
But that's when we liquidate the asset. But we don't want to do that.
no, we don't. We want to keep it. So we're trying to figure out a way to sell the business to the employees, because after all, we're not going to be here that much longer. And
hey.
so, well, that much is kind of an elastic
That
thing.
much.
I can talk about that and say, yeah, it's elastic, and I've cheated death. I don't know how many times, probably at least 10 that I can think of.
Dan, I want to interrupt and say that I'm so glad you have a new door, because I remember one evening Mary Lou had to go back to Urban Ore because the workers couldn't figure out how to close the door. So I'm glad your capital has improved your lives a good deal.
Yes.
Wait a minute, I didn't get that. Would you repeat that one?
Oh, there was one night Neil was staying with us, and the roll-up door wouldn't go down, and the contacts wouldn't contact, and I had to go down, help close the door.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah.
The door is better now, Neil.
Oh yeah, that thing was terrible. It made a screeching noise when it came down. But then you had to really haul on that chain to get it to come down, and it was also hard to raise. So
I'll say one other observation. I spent a number of days just hanging out in the parking lot. And this is true of several of the businesses like Construction Junction in Pittsburgh and Community Forklift in DC. And people are happy. People are happy going in, bringing things to either donate or sell, and happy coming out with a purchase that they paid pennies on the dollars for a good piece of good product that they needed.
Yeah.
So you're in the happy business as well as the reuse business.
Oh,
Every day, every single day,
oh,
somebody will thank us for existing. You don't get that at AT&T, you know.
yeah, it kind of rolls off after a while, like rain off of a raincoat. You just get to every day. You just get this. Oh, I'm so glad you exist. Oh my gosh.
Cascade of love. It's just wonderful.
And one other thing about Urban Ore and all the similar stores, and I learned this from Dan and Mary Lou, that after they became successful, other reuse businesses started locating in their vicinity
Yep.
in Berkeley. And finally, there was so much traffic that restaurants started opening.
Yep.
So
Yeah, yeah.
these stores
Yep.
create a destination.
Yep.
And
Well,
Mark Foster,
we're like lichen on a rock, you know. We go in and inhabit the hard space, and the fact of our existence helps others locate around us.
and
Yeah,
Mark,
when you have a big bunch of people coming in from 100 miles away, for example, they're out there growing marijuana when it was still illegal, and
Yeah,
they're coming in with $100 bills in their pockets. They're coming to your place and spending a couple hours buying a whole bunch of windows so they can build another greenhouse, and then they want to be there. They're hungry. Well,
yep.
right across the street is this wonderful burrito place that opened up after it was empty, and then all of a sudden, an entrepreneur came in, a woman, and made it work and it's still there. It's a wonderful Mexican restaurant.
Mark,
And
Yeah, but we
actually,
moved, and now the restaurant across the street is a Korean place.
she used to go around and pick up our broken tile, and
Yeah.
she made it into uh, what do you call it when you put that into a matrix and put it on the wall? Uh, anyway,
Well, she
she
has
did
murals. She has tile murals,
tile
actually. And
murals.
she
Yeah,
has one
a lot
with a
of
fountain
our
coming out of it.
busted
It's great.
ceramics. She'd pick up a bucket full and go back and turn it into a beautiful thing.
She said she wanted all the gaudy tile, please.
Yeah.
Mark Foster in Second Chance told me that Second Chance, which is located in downtown Baltimore, is now a date night destination.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know that's true of Urban Ore as well.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. There
Actually,
have been people who had their names in the class when there were newspapers. They had class. There was one classified in
Uh-huh.
particular. This is for the blonde woman that I talked to at Urban Ore the other day. Please give me a call.
oh yeah. People walk around all the time with holding hands. It is
Mhm.
a dating destination.
Nesting behavior.
Jill, is there time to get questions?
Unfortunately, it is time. I feel like we could all hang out and appreciate this conversation for much longer, but we are pushing up against the hour.
Sure.
I do want to thank everyone for attending today's presentation and especially for the work that you're all doing, both personally and professionally, for sustainable resource management. I want a special shout out to Chris, who, without his support throughout this endeavor, would not have gone as smoothly. So thank you for driving the slideshow and responding to the chat and keeping our technology running smoothly here. Dan and Mary Lou,
Yes.
your your open sharing of the both the business side and the social enterprise side of Urban Ore is always just so inspiring and such evidence that the triple bottom line is a real thing. And
Yes, it is.
I will echo one of the comments in the chat of we need to get you all on primetime television and spread the word. I think it's a simple example of how the cost issue should be an argument that we're no longer hearing. And Neil,
Yes.
as I'm sure you've seen in the chat, I echo the responses of several people here today. What a great, concise story of kind of the history, what brought us here today, and what's really necessary for moving further. So I really want to thank you for the time that you put together in putting together the presentation and all of the resources. So yes, a recording will be shared for those of you that either weren't able to attend the whole thing or want to go back and review some of the important information. We'll also be sharing links to the resources that have been shared that are available online and key resources shared in the chat. And up on the screen, we'll also share links to upcoming events for those of you that want to continue on your zero waste educational journey. Green Education and our partners all have some great opportunities coming up to continue the conversation. Great.
Thanks for this opportunity.
Thank
Neil,
you very much, Neil, and certainly Chris, thank you.
Neil,
Oh,
you were
yes.
brilliant. You were brilliant, Neil. It was wonderful.
I'm so pleased that I was coherent.
Well, the two of us
Oh,
have
yeah, you were very
so
good.
long and really treasure our friendship.
Well, I'll be out on the next plane.
Okay.
Okay.
Well,
Bye,
thanks
everyone.
everyone.
Thank
Have a
you.
great afternoon.
Thank you.
Before we dive into today's session, the history and future of U.S. recycling features 3 experts who've been instrumental in shaping today's zero waste movement.